So basically, I'm not a legal expert, but I can offer some general observation based on information provided in this article. So, the determination of guilt and appropriate legal consequences for a man's action would depend on specific laws and regulations in the jurisdictions where the case was being tried, as well as interpretation of those laws by the legal system involved. So, in the scenario described, a man administered a potentially lethal dose of sleeping pills to his wife and then attempted to end both of their lives using carbon monoxide poisoning. So the wife did die as a result of these actions, along with one of the family's pets. So it's mentioned that the level of carbon monoxide in the wife's blood was not high enough to kill a healthy person, but it was enough to kill his frail wife. So the lawyer of the man argued that his actions were initiated by both passion and compassion that could potentially be used as a defense to argue that the man's intentions were not malicious, but rather stemmed from a deep emotional response to his wife's suffering. On the other hand, the prosecution argued that the man did uh, what the man has did was illegal and should result in his imprisonment. So in many legal systems, intentionally causing the death of another person, even if done out of compassion or under emotionally distressing circumstances, could potentially be considered a crime such as manslaughter or murder. So, regarding whether a man should receive the death penalty would depend on if the jurisdiction in question has a death penalty in place, and if yes, the specific criteria and procedures for imposing it. The application of the death penalty is often subject to complex set of legal and ethical considerations, and public opinion on the matter can vary widely. Ultimately, the decision on guilt as well as any other potential penalties would be up to the court system and the legal professionals involved in the case. So it's worth noting that this is response is general analysis and not specific legal opinion on the case. So what do you think was the man's ethical perspective? Based on the information provided in the scenario, it seems that ethical perspective of man was driven by complex mixture of compassion, uh, desperation, and a belief in helping his wife and her suffering. He was faced with a moral dilemma due to his wife's severe conditions, including uh, Lou Gehrig's disease and severe heart disease, which left her unable to communicate, walk, or feed herself. In her note, she explicitly expressed a desire to die, and her husband, described as a loving and devoted spouse, chose to administer a lethal injection of sleeping pills to fulfill her request. When this did not lead to her death, he restored to a method involving carbon monoxide poisoning in the car, intending to end her life, his own, and the lives of their pets. From an ethical standpoint, the husband appeared prioritize his wife's relief from suffering over adhering to legal and social norms against assisted suicide. He may have believed that he was acting out of compassion to end her pain and choose a course of action that he thought was best for her. However, his doings were against the law, and his lawyer argued that it was a crime of passion and compassion. It suggests that man's ethical perspective was likely guided by deeply personal emotional response to his wife's situations, even if it is conflicted with legal and social standards in place. So, important to note that ethical perspective can be complex, influenced by religious, personal beliefs, and specific circumstances individual finds themselves in. What is opinion regarding this issue? Support your opinion with different perspective on assisted suicide, death, that you have learned from various theories of ethics and examined your values to construct a reasonable point of view. Utilitarianism, uh, like for utilitarianism perspective, the morality of assisted suicide would be evaluated based on overall happiness and suffering it generates. In this case, one would argue that assisting the wife in ending her life might have been compassionate act considering her severe medical condition and expressed desire to die. By ending her suffering, her husband might have increased overall happiness in this situation. On the other hand, the potential negative impact on husband and other family members as well as broader social implications should also be considered. If we see deontological ethics might emphasize the husband's duty to respect the sanctity of life and uphold moral principles. In this context, assisted suicide might be seen as morally wrong as it involves intentionally causing the death of another human being, even if it's done out of compassion. Act of killing, regardless of circumstances, could be deemed unethical from deontological standpoint. Virtue, if we consider virtue ethics, should consider husband's intention and character traits. If his motivation was generally driven by love and compassion for his wife's suffering, his actions might be viewed more sympathetically. However, one could also argue that the true virtue involves finding alternate ways to elevate suffering without restoring to ending a life. From a right-based perspective, the wife's autonomy and right to make decisions about her own life should be respected. If she had clear, informed, and voluntary wish to end her life, some might argue that her right to self-determination should take precedence. However, this perspective would need to be balanced against potential social concerns and broader implications of legalizing assisted suicide. So, different religious and cultural beliefs influence views on assisted suicide. Some religions may strictly forbid any intentional hastening of death, while others might allow more flexibility in end of life decisions. Cultural norms and values can also shape opinions on the sanctity of life and autonomy of individuals. Considering these perspectives, constructing a reasonable point of view involves weighing principles of compassion, autonomy, the uh, sanctity of life, and potential social consequences. It's essential to recognize that the issue of assisted suicide is complex and multifaceted, with no single answer that fits all situations. Public policies and laws related to assisted suicide often emerge from a careful consideration of these ethical dimensions, taking into account diverse perspectives within a society.